Good morning, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be today or this evening. My name is Richard Morningstar. I'm the founding chairman of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. And I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us in today's very timely discussion. This event is part of our ongoing Climate Ambition series, which aims to encourage even greater climate ambition ahead of the Leaders Summit on Climate, which will take place tomorrow. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. This event is on the record, and we're currently live streaming on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We encourage you to engage with us over Twitter with the hashtags AC Energy and Leaders Climate Summit, and also by tagging us at AC Global Energy. Today, this morning, here in the United States anyway, we'll discuss the state of the offshore wind industry and the opportunities it presents for achieving net zero emissions. On March 29th, the Biden administration, alongside the Departments of Interior, Energy, and Commerce, announced a goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of wind energy, offshore wind by 2030. The three pillars of this announcement were to advance wind energy projects, to create good-paying union jobs, to invest in American infrastructure, to strengthen the domestic offshore wind supply chain, and to support critical research and data sharing to bolster innovation. This announcement was well received by industry and government officials across the United States and around the world. The administration specifically singled out offshore wind as a viable technology for America's future net zero economy. As the United States embarks on the journey to build out 30 gigawatts of offshore wind in the next decade, there are many opportunities to cooperate with other countries to share lessons. Countries such as Denmark, and Denmark has been a true leader in the offshore wind energy industry. In fact, a Danish company is playing a major role here in the United States. Therefore, it's my pleasure now to introduce our first keynote speaker of today's event, which will be followed by a panel moderated by Maggie Jackson, and then we'll have Kadri Simpson, the EU's climate or energy commissioner. So I would like to now introduce, though, Ambassador Thomas Anker Christensen, who is the climate ambassador for the Kingdom of Denmark. Ambassador Christensen has worked for more than 25 years as a Danish diplomat, including as ambassador to Egypt and Iran. I would guess both of those jobs could almost be as difficult as being a climate ambassador. He has an impressive background in the climate field, in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and in the cabinet of the United Nations Secretary General. In particular, he has extensive experience leading the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So today, we welcome you, Ambassador, to share your insights on the energy transition and speak about Denmark's leading role in offshore wind technologies. So thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Ambassador Morgenstein. Thank you to the Atlantic Council for inviting Denmark and me to address you today. It's a great honor, and especially since we are at the cusp of the Biden summit, the Biden Climate Leadership Summit, over the next few days, where the Danish Prime Minister has been invited to address the summit on the topic of innovation, and indeed offshore wind will be one of the key features in her remarks. Richard, what I'd want to do is to take one step back and tell people a little bit about where Denmark comes from, then where we are, and then hopefully a little bit about where we will be, where we're heading. In Denmark, you might think of us as a country that has very consistent policies and regulatory frameworks, and has been on a green curve for the last many decades. And in a way, that is true. That's the story in the US about Denmark. And we have had a fairly consistent approach to greening ourselves ever since the oil crisis in 1973, putting in place policies that have driven energy efficiency and also created the market for renewables, very much as the US has actually done in periods, at least over the last 50 years as well. But what really changed for us was the incoming government in 2019. We had an election that where elections in Denmark for the last decades have been decided on the question of migration, foreigners. For the first time in a generation, we had an election that was actually decided by climate change, and especially a youth movement energized by the likes of Greta Thunberg, who wanted to see real touchable change. And they got their parents and grandparents to join them. And within a few weeks from the election, the ground shifted under the public discourse. And what seemed untenable just a few weeks earlier actually became almost like a public demand for us to set a very ambitious target for reducing emissions and decarbonizing Denmark by 2030. And the current government in Denmark is led by the Social Democrats. They were campaigning on a platform of going to a reduction of 60%, but the majority they have to govern in parliament had the request of them to go to 70%. And we had a public petition in parliament with a law proposed by the public of 70% target. So that's what the government ended up going for. And we adopted last June by law a 70% target for 2030 with a view to climate neutrality in 2050. And now we're in the process of developing the action tracks that will lead us to the 70%. And the number one decision taken after this law was adopted was exactly on offshore wind. And we are currently at about 40% reduction on the 1990 baseline that we are using in Europe. And we need to then reduce another 30%. So we're a little more than half the way in order to get to the 70% in 2030. And in order to sustain our energy build out, the decision is to build so-called energy islands off the coast of both our west coast and in the Baltic Sea. 2 energy islands with a potential total capacity of 10 gigawatt of offshore wind. We are 6 million inhabitants in Denmark. So for us, 10 gigawatt is a lot of energy. It's about up to 130 to 150% of what we need. And we currently already on a good day are at more or less 100% of our energy from renewable energy and in particular wind. So it will add a lot of energy into our grid. We have a plan to export green energy to our neighboring countries, but then also to build a capacity in these artificial islands to, through electrolyzes, produce liquid hydrogen, green hydrogen, through the so-called Power-to-X technologies. And these offshore wind farms will be not based on the islands, but next to the islands, but then with the islands as the hub for both the storage of energy, the transformation into liquid hydrogen, and then the pumping of the hydrogen onto ships and onto shore. These offshore wind farms will be ready for operation by the end of this decade. And what they will also allow us to do, and that's the second action track, is to decarbonize industry. Because we of course realize that both globally and nationally, more than industry actually has more emissions now than power generation. So we need to decarbonize cement, steel, aluminium, plastics, but also shipping, aviation, heavy-duty trucking, and so on. And the other area where Denmark is trying to lead is on decarbonizing shipping. We have the world's largest transport company, Maersk, is Danish, also operates in many American ports. And Maersk have made the pledge to have their first zero carbon ship sailing already by 2023. And they will need fuels for that. They have set up a center in Copenhagen for zero carbon fuels, and are looking at not only the fuels, but also how to produce those fuels and so on. So we will be launching very soon a new mission innovation on shipping, bringing together the major shipping nations of the world, but also the value chain of shipping, because we need to work on port facilities, on storage, on the global transport chain in order to facilitate that transformation. So in a way, there's a direct link between the large-scale offshore wind, the liquefying of energy, and then to the decarbonization of transport like shipping or indeed aviation and heavy-duty trucks. In Denmark, as part of the implementation framework for the 70% reduction, the government has also created public-private partnerships with the 13 major sectors in our economy, and shipping being one of them, energy-intensive industry being another. And through these partnerships, the government has an ongoing conversation with the private sector on how to move this forward. And interestingly, the Danish private sector wants the government to be ambitious. They're asking for stronger frameworks because they believe that that gives them a competitive edge on the global stage. Just a few examples here. We have about 6% of the Danish private sector workforce in the green industry, and somewhere around 12 to 13% of our exports are in green tech. And in Denmark, for every gigawatt of offshore wind that we install, we count that adds 12 to 15,000 jobs to our workforce. In fact, I think about half of the windmills that are currently in the US are produced by Danish wind producers and have created around 100,000 jobs. So wind onshore and offshore is really an energy source for the future, both for the power system, but also for decarbonizing industry and transport. And we can only welcome the US and other countries to join this. The more we install, the more the price comes down, the more we can also use this energy source to power emerging economies, poorer countries that also have a high demand for energy going forward. And as we are pushing on the end of investments into fossil energy sources, the demand for energy, this type of clean, green energy will keep going up. And let me just end by saying that, at least for us, the energy independence that we are getting through offshore wind also increases our energy security and has led to the decision by the Danish government with Parliament to end the production of oil and gas in the North Sea. We are the largest oil and gas producer in the European Union, and we have taken the decision last year to end that in line with the Paris Agreement, because we believe that the offshore wind adventure that we're in is a much better deal for us as a country than keeping on exploring oil and gas. Let me end here, Ambassador. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Christensen, for setting the stage so well for today's discussion. I always find it fascinating to learn about Denmark's energy islands and your plans for the future. And here in the United States, we're really talking about the power generation stage, but looking forward towards what's ahead is very exciting. I am Margaret Jackson, the Deputy Director for Climate and Advanced Energy at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. And again, I want to welcome everyone joining us today. I'm going to be moderating the next portion of our program. I'm delighted to continue this conversation on the role of offshore wind in achieving higher climate ambition in the context of tomorrow's climate summit. This panel is going to highlight perspectives also from Europe, but also in Asia and Japan and here in the United States, both at the federal and state level. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Vice Minister of Energy, Albinas Zanadavičius, from the Ministry of Energy, Republic of Lithuania. He has worked in the field of diplomacy for over 25 years and has extensive experience in economic and energy security policy. Welcome, Vice Minister. Can you please start by sharing with us how offshore wind fits into Lithuania's energy strategy and path to net zero emissions? And perhaps based on Ambassador Christensen's last comment there on energy security, you might have a perspective from Lithuania there as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Well, Lithuania is one of the prominent examples where offshore wind development is the answer to countries' energy independence and decarbonization needs. Our electricity sector undergoes one of the most dramatic transformations in the world, both in terms of grid management and generation of electricity. Until 2009, Lithuania was the most nuclear-dependent country in the world, where nuclear energy comprised more than 90% of our electricity consumption. But since reactors of our nuclear power plant were Russian-built of the type also used in Chernobyl, we had to quite abruptly shut down the plant, and virtually overnight, Lithuania, a huge net exporter of electricity, became a country of huge electricity deficits. To put things into perspective, a country of 3 million population lost 3 gigawatts of generating capacity. And therefore, the primary goal of Lithuania was to increase local generation. After spectacularly failing our new nuclear power plant project back in 2012, where we were defeated in the nationwide referendum, well, we had commissioned some additional natural gas-powered capacities. We built interconnections with Sweden and Poland. But for many different reasons, building of new generating capacities based on fossil fuel were not feasible. So Lithuania has chosen a path towards green electricity, mainly onshore wind and solar, though at the same time struggle to sufficiently increase local generation persistence. Even today, Lithuania only generates roughly 30% of our electricity needs, while we consider 70% of local generation a healthy target. Available and cost-effective onshore technologies have their limits. Our plans and analysis show that by 2025, we will exhaust our onshore wind capacity, simply running out of onshore space. And our plans for 2025 are to have 1.2 gigawatts of onshore wind and up to 1 gigawatt solar capacity. And although we are undisputed leader in the Eastern Baltics, this would still cover only up to 50% of our needs. Therefore, for us, offshore wind will be the main technology that will eventually close the gap between our generation and consumption. A study of Baltic energy market interconnection plans showed that Lithuania's offshore wind potential amounts to 4.5 gigawatts. So we developed a master plan that indicated 3 territories for development of renewables. One was selected as a priority, and its potential is roughly 3 gigawatts. And at the first stage, it is decided now by the government to develop 700 megawatts of offshore wind power project. Tender will be announced in 2023, and we expect the plant will be operational by 27. Then further projects will follow, most probably together with regional partners, and our overall offshore wind ambition is at least 3 gigawatts of installed capacity. This would attract at least €1 billion of private investments, and main beneficiaries being transport and construction sector. Thousands of jobs may be created, and the project may incentivize also development of our seaport, Klaipėda, which is very keen to play a role as a Baltic offshore wind logistics hub. So probably I will stop here. I think that offshore wind is the future technology, and we have to continue developing it as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vice Minister. I really appreciate you tying together how onshore wind and solar really are something you're looking at and expanding, but offshore wind really is necessary to fill that gap. That was really a great background, and thank you very much. I look forward to coming back and elaborating on some of the points you raised later in the conversation. But first, I would like to turn to Deputy Commissioner Shinichi Kihara. He's from the Agency for Natural Resources and Energy at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan. Commissioner Kihara has rich experience in the area of international energy policy and has worked at METI for almost 3 decades. Welcome, Mr. Kihara. I'd like to ask you about Japan's view of offshore wind in the context of Prime Minister Suga's announcement of Japan's net zero target by 2050. I know that Japan has a target for offshore wind by 2030 of 10 gigawatts and plans to expand that over the next few decades. I look forward to your remarks and elaborating on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Maggie, and good evening from Tokyo to everybody. I am Shinichi Kihara. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Energy Agency of Japan. I'm in charge of the International Energy Strategy of Japan. I'd like to thank Ambassador Morningstar and the Atlantic Council for organizing this event and giving me this opportunity to participate. In Japan, as Maggie just introduced, last October, Prime Minister Suga declared Japan's commitment towards carbon neutrality by 2050. And since the announcement, carbon neutrality boom is happening in Japan. There's a bipartisan support from the politicians, and surprisingly, all industry sectors are supporting the direction. Carbon neutral goal is no more understood as the enemy to economy. It is Japan's new growth strategy. Carbon neutrality will lead to future corporate profits, creating a positive cycle of the economic growth and environmental protection. In December, following the declaration, Japan launched the extensive green growth strategy. The strategy includes action plans for 14 growing technologies covering energy, transport, manufacturing, and home office sectors. And offshore wind technology is one of them. Also, the strategy mobilized various policy tools, including 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund, and also tax and regulatory reform measures. And towards the carbon neutral target, reducing greenhouse gas emission from the energy sector is important, as it accounts for over 80% of the total emission. And preliminary power mix of the reference scenario as of 2050 for Japan is 50 to 60% renewables, and 30 to 40% will be nuclear and thermal power plants. And the rest, the 10%, will come from hydrogen and fuel ammonia power generation. This is a brand new technology. And coming to the potential of offshore wind, in Japan, renewable energy has nearly doubled in 10 years after the Fukushima, since the introduction of the feed-in tariff mechanism in 2012. But the major growth up to now came from the photovoltaic, the solar power. But now the next major renewable energy source with high potential is the offshore wind. offshore wind has the large potential capacity for installation and substantive cost reduction opportunity and large economic spillover effect. In Japan, northern part and western part are expected to have big capacity due to its high wind speed. We also see great market opportunity globally, expecting the capacity to grow 24-fold in next 20 years from 23 gigawatt today to 560 gigawatt by 2040. Major expansion will happen in Asian region, which we are very excited. The government of Japan is reinforcing the policies to accelerate installation of offshore wind capacity. And one is the rule for utilizing sea area. Japan is surrounded by sea, but the major hurdle for a long time to install offshore wind has been the lack of rule for utilizing sea area at national level. Coordination with fishermen was a challenge. So with unclear predictability, it was difficult to acquire long-term finance for projects. But in 2019, the Act on Promoting the Utilization of Sea Areas for Renewable Energy Generation came in effect. The Act designate offshore wind promotional zone, select developers by bid, and grant 30 years occupancy period. And as of now, the 4 promotional zone for the first time has been designated. And we also have offshore wind industrial vision to attract foreign and domestic investment by showing clear future picture of the offshore wind market in Japan. We formulated this vision for offshore power industry in December last year. Our government commit to creating an attractive domestic offshore wind market by committing the introduction target. We are planning to designate promotion zones to generate approximately 1 gigawatt of offshore wind power per year for 10 consecutive years. It means adding capacity of 10 gigawatt by 2030 and 30 to 45 gigawatt by 2040. And the efforts toward the future. From now on, the government's role is to 1, develop attractive domestic offshore wind market, 2, facilitate investment and build supply chain, and 3, enhance technology development and joint international project. We will provide various support. For technology development, we established 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund to support long-term technology development and demonstration. We also released offshore wind technology roadmap, including floating and wind turbines, to map out our needs for technology development toward 2030. For capital investment, we offer subsidies and tax reduction. Subsidies are a maximum 10 billion yen or $100 million. Tax reduction is up to 10% tax credit for facilities producing offshore wind turbines. In terms of business matching, the JETRO supports foreign companies coming into Japan, as well as Japanese suppliers expanding to the world. So we have very ambitious target and challenges. However, this is worth challenging. Japanese industry has multiple leading suppliers with rich experience and sophisticated technology, which they develop for onshore wind. And we will support them to jointly develop offshore wind capacity from now on with the leading industry around the world. So we are ready to contribute to the secure and sustainable energy future of Japan and also the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner Kihara, and thank you for outlining what the Japanese government is doing to really incentivize further offshore wind development, both from the financial perspective and also the regulatory perspective. Now I'd like to turn to the situation in the United States, and it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Heather Zeichel. She is the CEO of American Clean Power and the former Deputy Assistant to the President for Energy and Climate Change under the Obama administration. Ms. Zeichel, can you please put the Biden administration's goal of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 into context for us? And given the comments by our other panelists, perhaps you could also state where the United States is compared to Europe and Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to join you today. As you said, I'm the CEO of the American Clean Power Association. We are a trade association that focuses on wind, both on and offshore, solar, transmission, and storage. And as somebody who's worked on trying to stand up offshore wind in the United States, going back all the way to 2002, I couldn't be more excited about the opportunity and the once in a generation opportunity I see for us today to put steel in US waters. And I'd say that's not coming a moment too soon, given the twin challenges that we're trying to manage to tackle climate change and to pull us out of the pandemic-induced recession. We have the expertise needed to go big on offshore wind between US companies with decades of experience in the offshore oil and gas supply chain, American mariners, and investments from leading European and global energy companies, not to mention the expertise of our global colleagues in planning, installing, and operating large wind farms. Americans are eager to apply the considerable offshore wind energy experience of these companies to US projects to create a brand new American industry. States up and down the East Coast have been driving momentum in offshore wind, making to date offshore wind commitments exceeding 30 gigawatts, with more solicitations and new gigawatt targets to come. Needless to say, the American Clean Power Association was thrilled that the Biden-Harris administration has explicitly recognized the importance of offshore wind in tackling the climate crisis. When we look at that target of 30 gigawatts by 2030, we realize and recognize that that is an ambitious target, but it is absolutely achievable and one that our industry is happy to roll up our sleeves and work with the administration on. When you put 30 gigawatts in context, that's enough power to power approximately 10 million homes with offshore wind energy. And what's even, and as exciting as that is, it also sets the stage for a brand new homegrown energy industry that's going to slash carbon emissions, create 83,000 American jobs, $57 billion in investment, and add $25 billion in annual economic output into our economy by the end of this decade. The administration's goal of 30 gigawatts by 2030 will also push a government-wide approach that will be crucial in jumpstarting the industry. However, we also need to think about the long-term certainty and predictability that the industry is going to need from administration to administration, so we have the confidence to build a robust domestic supply chain. Many companies have made announcements about investments in ports and vessels and manufacturing, but only if their permits are approved. So getting through the project permitting steps is really important to creating business certainty and unleashing investments in the United States. We're excited to continue to work with the Interior Department to accelerate the path forward for environmental reviews of the projects in its pipeline, and obviously issuing additional offshore wind lease areas that are critical to hit state energy procurement goals. The supply chain linked to these new wind farms will open new avenues for American businesses and revitalize coastal and port communities. Many of these areas have long struggled with job losses and business closures, resulting in disadvantaged communities badly in need of new opportunities. The industry is ready to step up to deliver these jobs and workforce training. Not only have the states made the huge investments, but the offshore wind industry is also investing heavily in the supply chain. I can give you one example where Dominion Energy is investing more than $500 million to build a new US flagged installation, service and crew transfer vessel to be able to build these projects. Finally, offshore wind offers the promise of pollution-free energy sourced, located near many of the nation's largest population centers and frontline communities that are experiencing the impacts of climate change. So this conversation that the Biden administration is pushing forward about the need for a just and equitable transition, along with the job creation, I mean, all of these components fit exactly in the space of what is the opportunity on offshore wind and how do we work together as the public and private sector to ensure that we're taking full advantage of this rare and exciting opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Seikel, and for putting that into context for us. And I'm delighted now to introduce Commissioner Sean Latourette, because he's here to share the perspective from the state level in the United States. We've talked a lot about the Northeast and how really offshore wind is booming there, and there's a lot of great plans. Commissioner Sean Latourette is the acting commissioner for New Jersey's Department of Environmental Protection. He is a lawyer and a policymaker with more than 20 years of experience in environmental protection. And in his current role, he is responsible for formulating statewide environmental policy. Commissioner, we know that New Jersey is leading in offshore wind in the United States and has an ambitious target to reach 7.5 gigawatts by 2035. Can you elaborate on New Jersey's plans for carbon reduction and the role of offshore wind in achieving your goals? Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Maggie, for asking me to join you today. And thank you, Heather, for those remarks, and to colleagues around the world who are so focused on this really important industry that will help us to beat back the climate crisis that we are all enduring together. New Jersey is in many ways ground zero for some of the worst impacts of climate change. So we take this deeply seriously. We have a greater risk of sea level rise than many other places on the planet because of our low-lying and sinking nature. And so when the Governor Murphy, came into office in 2018, he initially set his targets on the development of the offshore wind industry and anchoring its presence in the mid-Atlantic United States right here in New Jersey. Part of how we are pushing this forward is through, first and foremost, our Energy Master Plan, which sets an ambitious target to reach neutrality by 2050. And in that reaches the target, Maggie, that you had mentioned with respect to offshore wind development. We've pursued solicitations for the wind energy areas that are off of the New Jersey coast. The first solicitation that our Public Utility Commission had put forward was awarded to Ørsted. So we have now an established working relationship with the folks there that Ambassador Christensen had mentioned in his opening remarks. And we're excited to help Ørsted anchor here in Atlantic City and in Newark, New Jersey, and to help facilitate the development of the offshore wind industry. New Jersey, the state, is going to build the first offshore wind specific port on the east coast of the United States at a 200-acre parcel off of our Delaware bayshore with immediate access to the Atlantic Ocean. So we're hoping to see the whole entire supply chain begin to anchor here and around the region. And that will help us in order to reach many of the goals that Heather, you had articulated relative to revitalizing communities and coastal towns. But just to put into context the need that New Jersey has with respect to not just offshore wind, but renewables more broadly, when we eye 2050, total state renewable energy capacity has to reach 60.5 gigawatts. And we anticipate that would be comprised of about 32 gigawatts of solar, nearly 11 gigawatts of offshore wind, and another 18 gigawatts of other firm capacity from low carbon or carbon neutral fuel sources. So while we are eyeing that first 7.5 by 2035, 2050 needs to see us much further down the road. And we're excited by the new relationship with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and getting those new lease areas identified and moving through the BOEM process, because as many folks have already mentioned during the course of their remarks, that the regulatory environment and the certainty that businesses need in order to have confidence in the marketplace within any given jurisdiction is critical. And so we need to see that not just from an environmental permitting perspective, but also in the message that we send to others in the energy industry with respect to the transition to a renewable future. And so to that end, New Jersey, I believe, is one of the first states in the country that is going to put a carbon cap on coal-fired and natural gas-fired power plants in order to help facilitate that shift, right? We need that market signal to be very clear. At the same time, we need to help every offshore wind developer through the permitting processes on both the federal and the state level, and in a manner that respects coastal resources and fishing communities, that protects frontline communities, and that provides benefits broadly to the population, because this is an opportunity for everyone to succeed together.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That was a great overview, and I really want to come back and talk through some of the opportunities around economic development and also around the balance with concerns around environmental protection. But before we continue that conversation, Vice Minister, I'd like to come back to you to talk about the cooperation needed to really meet these ambitious targets on offshore wind, especially in Northern Europe. I know that Lithuania's goals are well aligned with both the European Union and neighboring countries, but how are you managing this coordination piece, especially from an environmental and transmission perspective? For example, I know that Lithuania signed an MOU with some of the other Baltic states. I look forward to your remarks on this topic in particular.
Yeah, thank you for this question, because it is really also important to discuss the challenges that are in front of the development of offshore wind. And right now, what we are facing, the most difficult part is environmental and spatial planning. But in the future, once we have more offshore wind installations, seas will become crowded. Shipping routes will be again congested, and therefore it is necessary to start planning at least at the regional level, and do that really in advance. Of course, we are quite encouraged by the level of development that we have in the Baltic Sea region, and all the countries around Baltic Sea have signed a memorandum. We have so-called Baltic Energy Market Interconnection Plan, where we will be discussing different aspects of offshore wind development. We also are all members of European Union, and for us, what will be extremely important to see is also that we have a smart regulation, that we have regulation which is stable and simple at the same time, but regulation that puts, also as much market into development of offshore wind as possible, because we have to work in the market but not against the market, so that we don't have different imbalances later on. Another challenge where regional cooperation will be necessary, and that was already mentioned by Ambassador Christensen, it is integration of renewable energy into grids. We can do things much more cheaply if we do that together. We could also develop different technologies, hydrogen, for example, where energy might be produced in one place but then shipped to another. Lithuania is also working in the hydrogen field. We will be testing our existing pipelines to see how much of hydrogen they can accept and still work properly. So that is one of the areas where we are investigating possibilities. So to sum up, I think if we do not cooperate properly with our neighbors, one day our seas will get congested. We will have extreme difficulties in planning, new offshore wind installations, and only working together we can use our sea to the maximum, at the same time not undermining the environmental needs of our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Vice Minister. And I think that it's a very important lesson that we also need to be studying in the United States as we work across states and think about building out this transmission capacity, as you mentioned. But thank you very much for those examples. Deputy Commissioner Kihara, I'd like to come to you. And you mentioned a technology roadmap. And as I understand it, Japan is investing in several different technologies. We understand that there's not one silver bullet for this path to net zero. What is Japan doing, not only about maybe building domestic manufacturing capacity for offshore wind components, but also looking at production of other important energy resources such as hydrogen?
Yes, Maggie, thank you for the question. Yes, Japanese industry has multiple global leading suppliers with sophisticated technology on offshore wind power generation, like bearings, power generator, permanent magnets, and carbon fiber wind blades. So they can contribute in jointly developing large-scale wind turbines with leading industries around the world. But we see more opportunities for technology development ahead related to offshore wind. So jointly with the private sector, our ministry released an intensive technology development roadmap for its competitive offshore wind industry this April. So it's brand new. So we break down the entire supply chain into 8 key categories, list up a long list of necessary technology challenges, and consolidated them into a technology development roadmap towards 2030. And for the short term, we will speed up the technology development related to on-site survey and fixed offshore structure and construction, and aim for early cost reduction. But for the long term, the dream technology is the floating wind turbine. So we will accelerate the underlying technology development for the floating offshore turbine. We aim to conduct demonstration project in the ocean around 2025. So those are the technology developments we are working on. And you mentioned about the hydrogen. Hydrogen is another dream technology which will ensure the carbon neutrality target. And we are developing a lot of technology on hydrogen. And what I can introduce is the hydrogen power generation technology, which is brand new. And this will be a game changer for many countries who depends on fossil fuel energy. We can simply switch the gas power generation into a mixed fuel, hydrogen fuel, into the gas supply, and we can start from blending hydrogen with gas turbine, and eventually we reach 100% hydrogen power generation. So by that time, thermal plant will be carbon free. So this is a very new concept of thermal plant without CO2 emission. And already a demonstration project in Netherlands is started by a Japanese company. By 2025, we will have this first of the world 100% hydrogen fuel power generation by 2025. And this technology it solves the stranded asset issue. You can add on components to make the existing gas turbine thermal plant into a hydrogen power plant. So we are extensively developing this project in addition to many other hydrogen technologies. So this is very exciting. So this is a very exciting moment right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deputy Commissioner. And it is very exciting to think about how these technologies fit together. And I understand that due to the nature of the seabed off the coast of Japan, floating technology really is going to be imperative. So thank you for sharing the details of your roadmap. And I think everyone hopefully will have the chance to take a look and understand how Japan is thinking through that. Thank you for your remarks. Ms. Seikel, I would like to come back to you because we've talked about how the offshore wind industry in the United States really is in its early stages. And it's, as you said, a tremendous opportunity to build a completely new domestic industry from the ground up. So how do we make sure that the benefits of this new industry reach communities that are most in need of job opportunities and economic development?
Well, it's an excellent question, and one that our member companies and I think about on a regular basis. I mean, as you said, the United States is lagging behind other countries in harnessing the ocean energy resource. And as I take a step back and think about where the opportunities lie, I mean, we can look at onshore wind, for example, and the fact that there are 4,000 different components in a wind turbine. And if you think about where those are manufactured in the United States today, they're manufactured in 43 different states. So that really underscores the potential opportunity for the supply chain and what we can do in order to build jobs and create new economic opportunities. I'd also say that because there are other countries that have been taking a leadership position, whether that's Japan or Lithuania, we're able to learn from the experience of offshore wind in other countries as we're standing up this industry in our own country. So we can learn, we can apply lessons learned. And we have the expertise needed to go big on offshore wind, because the US companies with decades of experience in offshore oil and gas supply chain. And we've got these investments from leading global energy companies that are member companies of the American Clean Power Association, including Ørsted, Equinor, BP, and Shell. And I think the additional lens that the Biden administration has focused on, and how do we, and frankly, industries embraced, how do we work together to ensure a just and equitable transition as we're building out this new opportunity for offshore wind? So we are very focused on how do we take advantage of lessons learned? How do we make sure that we are leveraging this new opportunity to create American jobs? And how do we do this in a way that's going to allow us to tackle climate change and position the world to be a leader in offshore wind technology? And I think that's where the true opportunity lies. And since the Deputy Commissioner mentioned it, floating wind technology, as we think about it today, is also a place where I think where America can lead. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity off the coast of California that's currently in discussion. Obviously, we need to have some lease sales move forward, and we need to clear the way with some Defense Department conflicts. But I see that truly as an additional area where America can lead in not only the deployment of clean energy, but also on the innovation front, on the innovation side of things as well.
Thank you so much. And I do appreciate you talking about how we can learn lessons from other countries. I think that's such an important point here. And we note that we're in different stages depending on where we are around the world. And I think this is just such a tremendous opportunity. So thank you very much. Commissioner Latourette, I'd like to come back to you to talk about some of the things that the Vice Minister mentioned were in deconfliction of the maritime space. And a lot of this relates to not only environmental protection, certainly, which you are an expert in, but also working with other maritime industries. So how do you see, from your perspective in New Jersey, how government and private industry can work together to get ahead of some of these mitigation measures to keep offshore wind projects on time and meet these targets in the timeframe we've all proposed?
Yeah, it's a great question, Maggie. I spent a good amount of my pre-government career in infrastructure development and ports development in particular. And one of the things that we have to be really, really careful about is engaging all of the stakeholders that have a vested interest in any particular wind energy area, from fishermen to conservationists. We are working in New Jersey to facilitate a working group that brings all of those stakeholders to the table. And one of the things that we're learning from that experience is, as is often the case, folks fear what they don't know. And the idea of steel in the water to a commercial or recreational fishery that has used a particular fishing ground going back generations in their families, that is a frightening concept. And folks wonder how it will affect them, how it will affect their livelihoods, how it will affect our economy, which has a significant driver in the folks that fish the coast of New Jersey. And so we have to make sure that they understand how to participate so that the environmental permitting process doesn't become the tail wagging the dog of getting that steel in the water and having turbines turning. From an infrastructure development perspective in the United States, that is something that I've always counseled folks to be deeply concerned about. Engage up front so that you eliminate the risk to any critical path item as you move forward to development. With respect to environmental protection, we follow a three-pronged paradigm that probably isn't uncommon, which is when we're talking about the disruption to any aquatic resource or coastal resource, we have to make sure first and foremost that we are avoiding the impact in any way possible. Now, that won't be possible to completely avoid every potential environmental impact. So how do you minimize that impact? Are there ways that you, from a perspective of turbine arrangement, can facilitate minimal impacts to a shipping route, to avoid maritime conflicts, to avoid a particular sensitive underwater resource? And then lastly, when you've done as much avoidance and minimization as you can, how do you mitigate for those impacts, right? Because as we go and put that steel in the water, it will have inevitable impact to the ecosystem. We anticipate that recovery will occur, no question. We know that resources recover. However, there is a time where that resource is offline, so to speak. What do we do about that? Do we facilitate artificial reef development? Do we help the fishing community to find other fishing grounds of similar nature in the meantime? Those are all, it's a thought process that we all have to go through together with those who have an interest in the fishing grounds, the developers, the environmental regulators, both state and federal. It is a Rubik's Cube of an issue that we're just seeing unfold on the Atlantic coast. We'll build a good paradigm for it, and then others can learn from and improve upon it.
Thank you so much. And I don't want to, I would actually like to come back to Deputy Commissioner Kihara, if you'd be interested in commenting on, from your perspective in Japan. I know that fishing is such a big part of not only the Japanese cuisine, but also industry. And that has been one of the key community groups that the government at the local and national level has had to engage with. Mr. Kihara, do you have any comments based on what the commissioner just spoke about in the context of New Jersey? I think there's a lot of, again, lessons we can learn here in how to engage and inform and educate these communities. Deputy Commissioner, I think you're still on mute.
Yes, thank you very much for this great question. Actually, yes, the coordination between different party is a very complex issue, but we try to address this. Firstly, with this new act of zoning new act, we have a intensive process to coordinate with different ministries, not only our ministry, Ministry of Industry, but we also involve the Minister of Land and Infrastructure, and we make sure, and also the Fishery Ministry, to make sure we don't have negative impact on the fishermen's activity, but also managing this cable wiring system. We also communicate with the telecommunication ministry, and also for environmental protection perspective, we also coordinate with the environment ministry, and also the Ministry of Defense is also involved. So there are many stakeholders when we want to build one turbine. So we try to coordinate. So we have this act in force now, but not only the act, but we try to the government to take lead in this coordination, to take active role. Otherwise, there will be a lot of duplication or process or slowdown of one thing takes place another. So we are setting up this kind of, it's similar to engage upfront. We try to engage all the related parties and try to coordinate, led by the government. So we are now trying to set up this. Thank you very much for this great question.
Yes, and thank you. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I think it's really fascinating in the Japanese context and very relevant and takes multiple layers of coordination, like you said. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this panel. I want to thank you all again for joining us and sharing your different perspectives. We touched on so many really important topics of this conversation. And right now, it's my pleasure to give the floor to the Atlantic Council President and CEO, Mr. Fred Kemp. He's going to be introducing our next distinguished speaker, Commissioner Kadri Simpson. Fred, over to you.
Maggie, thanks so much, and what a wonderful panel. Good morning. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, as Maggie said. Wherever you are in the world, I want to thank you for joining us for this very timely event with Commissioner Kadri Simpson, who I'll be introducing in just one moment. First of all, I want to thank Ambassador Christensen for his excellent framing remarks, as well as Vice Minister Zananavicius, Deputy Commissioner Kihara, Ms. Zeichel, and Commissioner LaTourette, and our own Margaret Jackson, Maggie, for the important discussion we just heard on the offshore wind industry. This event is part of a hugely impressive series this week, hosted by the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. Randy Bell and his team are just the best in this work. This Raising Ambition series aims to encourage increased climate ambitions and targets ahead of the Biden administration's Leaders Summit on Climate tomorrow. As we've heard throughout this Raising Ambition series, we are in a unique moment that will define the energy transition. The offshore wind industry is going to play a transformative role in meeting climate targets and stimulating a green economy. So the United States is eager to work with partners and allies in Europe, in Japan, and around the world and across the public and private sector to expand offshore wind development and advance new offshore technologies. It's that kind of cooperation that fits so well into the Atlantic Council's core values and our mission, very simply stated mission statement of shaping the global future together. And it's also why it's such a distinct pleasure for me to introduce Her Excellency Kadri Simpson, the European Commissioner for Energy. Among her many responsibilities, Commissioner Simpson is a leader in implementing the European Green Deal in the energy sector and supporting member states toward their goals, notably with national energy and climate plans. She's the former Minister of Economic Affairs and Infrastructure of the Republic of Estonia and a former member of the Estonian Parliament. We're delighted to host her for today's offshore wind discussion because Europe is, by far, the world leader in offshore wind production and has been pioneering the technological development of the industry for decades already. Commissioner Simpson and the European Commission have been champions of promoting offshore wind, most recently through the release of the offshore strategy in November of last year, which set a target for 60 gigawatt of offshore wind by in the EU by 2030, and then a really quite breathtaking 300 gigawatt by 2050. Moderating the discussion with Commissioner Simpson this morning is Ambassador Richard Morningstar, the founding chairman of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center and former ambassador to the European Union, and also former ambassador to Azerbaijan. So it's my pleasure to pass the mic over to Ambassador Morningstar. Dick, take it away.
Thank you very much, Fred, and welcome to you, Commissioner Simpson. Welcome back to the Atlantic Council. You participated in our Global Energy Forum last year, and I believe we're going to see you again in a few weeks with respect to our program on US-EU cooperation this coming in early May, which our future Europe Center will be sponsoring. I'd first like to offer you congratulations in the agreement reached within the EU last night on the climate change law, which is a major step forward. Excellent timing, given the climate summit that will be taking place tomorrow. So maybe to begin, if you could make some comments on offshore wind, how you see that fitting into the 2050 net zero goal, and how also it might be integrated with other forms of energy.
Thank you, Ambassador, and good afternoon from Brussels. And indeed, we have made some excellent decisions today and this night. So we reached agreement on climate law. We reached on agreement that we will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions at least 55% by 2030. But at the same time, we'll also announced today our taxonomy regulation that guides private investments into green projects. So these are necessary steps to achieve our both 2030 targets, but also 2050 targets. And by 2050, renewable energy must power most of the climate neutral economy. So there will be some share for nuclear, but most of our energy demand must be covered by renewables. And that gives us just 30 years. This is more or less one generation to transform our energy system from the current model to much more greener and more efficient system. And we estimate that already by 2030, we need about 38 to 40% share of renewables to meet our targets. And wind power will be crucial in reaching that goals. We will need massive amounts of green electricity to replace coal and lignite and also natural gas. So in our offshore renewable energy strategy that we adopted last year, yes, we set a very ambitious target, both for 2030, 60 gigawatts, and also for 2050. So 300 gigawatts, but not only offshore wind, but other technologies too. And compared to today, this means a 25-fold increase. And it includes both bottom fixed and floating wind. And as you know, here in European Union, we do have 5 sea basins, and they do have massive potential for offshore energy. And we have to keep in mind that they do have different geographical environment. Not all of them do have shallow coastal waters, but for that we need also other technologies. And our European offshore strategy actually covers also other offshore technologies. We are also aiming at 40 gigawatts of other technologies like wave and tidal energy and also floating solar. So this is a long answer to a very concrete question.
Thank you. And I'm going to come back specifically to wind in a couple of minutes. But one issue that I think never gets enough attention is the relationship between new technologies and dealing with climate change and energy security. And that, I think, would be particularly true in the area of the world where you come from, in the Baltics, as well as in Central and Eastern Europe, where there's concerns about overdependence on, for example, Russian electricity, fossil fuels, including gas coming from Russia. Could you maybe comment on that relationship and how much you might expect these new technologies to mitigate any concerns with respect to this kind of dependence?
Well, indeed, in our recent history, we have had some crises. The last natural gas crisis is more than 10 years old. And after that, we invested a lot to diversify our gas suppliers. So we took care that all the member states will have different suppliers. We invested into LNG terminals and better connected gas market. On electricity side, indeed, I'm coming from Estonia, and Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are the only 3 EU member states who are still in the same synchronous area with Russia and Belarus. That means that our power system is operated synchronously. And that is also the reason why European Union has invested and we have made a decision that we will invest almost 1 billion euros to desynchronize these 3 Baltic states, and they will be connected via Poland to the Central Eastern system. And at the same time, already Baltic states and Nordic countries, they do have a regional electricity market, which is a very good example of how bigger regional markets can accommodate more renewables. And this is also a very good example how this boosts investments into renewables. And this is also the reason why in this region there is a good regional cooperation in Baltic Sea, and lots of plans to build new offshore wind parks. From our side, we can help those investments by supporting grid investments, because the reality is that offshore wind parks will be built somewhere where no existing grid connection is available.
You certainly do have a lot of wind coming off of the Baltic Sea in that region. And Deputy Minister Zananavicius, I'm sure you know, in the panel before, made very clear how important this all is to, in fact, create an independent electricity system, as well as mitigating reliance on fossil fuels. Coming back specifically to wind, what needs to be done? Yeah, you have the climate change law, you have the goals. What additional steps do you think need to be taken to meet the goals that you have for offshore wind, as well as some of the other technologies?
Well, there are several steps that we have to take, the European priority is about making the EU an example, but we want also to promote offshore, not only in Europe. This shouldn't be only our energy success, but also a European industrial and economic success. So we promote these technological solutions also in our partner countries, because renewable offshore energy should play a prominent role in the recovery phase, because it has great potential by creating domestic jobs. So this is one side. Of course, the other side is that offshore wind is competing for the same territory where we do have different economical players already present: fisheries, shipping, even defense. And in that context, we need good agreement with other players, how to plan necessary developments, and of course we need a lot of renewable electricity, because there is also a sectorial need for hydrogen. And according to our hydrogen strategy, we will promote green hydrogen. For that, we need lots of excess renewable electricity. And the green hydrogen we will need because there are sectors like certain parts of industry, long-haul transport that cannot be electrified. But where direct electrification is possible, we will do so, because this is the easiest way to achieve our climate targets.
Along relating to cooperation, which you talked about, we had on our earlier panel a deputy commissioner from Japan. We had the commissioner from New Jersey, and of course, representatives from Heather Zeichel from the U.S. We'll be having the summit the next day. How can we best cooperate? How can the EU best cooperate, not just with the United States, but also countries like Japan, not just the federal government in the US, but states like New Jersey, and where we had Commissioner Latourette. And how is this something that can be formalized? Are there ways to formalize this cooperation? How can we work together and gain the benefit of best practices and the best technologies?
Well, the offshore renewable sector is an opportunity both for us and our businesses, and that's why European Union is actively engaged with our international partners to help create a favorable environment to develop offshore renewable energy. And we are looking forward to further cooperation with the United States, for example. I have had already 2 very, very good meetings today with Jennifer Granholm and his deputy David Turk. We mentioned also offshore in both of these meetings. And well, this has a vast potential. So we can also count on years of experience and cooperation with dedicated agencies such as IRENA and the International Energy Agency. And offshore comes up in our bilateral energy dialogues. So, well, basically all the countries across the world who have committed to climate neutrality, they face the challenge that the electricity demand will grow, and you have to, well, cover it. And at least for those countries who do have a coastline, the offshore presents a possibility, because the best spots on land are taken. So in this regard, the technological solutions that we are promoting will have a chance to cover the additional demand.
In ancient history, I was very much involved with the EU-US Energy Council, which still exists, and there's been talk about expanding the work of the Energy Council into the climate area as well. Do you have any comments on that? Is that something that makes sense?
Well, EU-US Energy Council indeed exists. It was launched, according to my best knowledge, already 2009, and since it took place annually. Unfortunately, last year it was postponed due to COVID, and the year before it was postponed because this current European Commission was not able to take the position in November 2019. So our start was postponed by a month. But now I've had already very good conversation with Jennifer Granholm. We agreed that Energy Council will take place this year. And on top of that, we want to create also a tradition that there will be business-to-business meeting, so that on addition to the political discussions, we can also share best practices. And of course, from our side, offshore wind has been a interest of ours, and we will see what are the topics from US side. Now, when Biden administration has announced that they are back and they are committed to Paris Agreement, I think that all the renewable technological solutions are gaining prominence both sides of Atlantic.
Maybe one last question. I think you will find that, of course, that the Biden administration will be much more receptive with respect to the Energy Council. But you also mentioned business. How much does reaching the goals that we all need to reach to get to getting to net zero? How much does that depend on cooperation between the public and private sector?
Well, we do see our role as our main task is to create predictable and secure investment environment, because just to reach our 2030 targets, we need additional 350 billion euros investment annually. And this is clear that it can't come from public funds alone. So we need to guide private investment into the green projects. By doing that, this is possibility that our economy will grow. Green projects tend to create lots of jobs. According to the estimations, they create jobs not only in the coastal areas. Of course, they do that too, firsthand. But we know that, for example, the production of wind blades or towers is happening also in the member states here in European Union that don't have coastal regions themselves. Czech Republic, Austria, they are good examples, or inland Spain or Poland. So in this regard, we are announcing our ambitious climate targets that should give investment security to private sector.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm afraid we've run out of time. In fact, gone a little bit over. But again, thank you for your really important insights today. And I also want to thank Ambassador Christensen and all of our distinguished panelists that we've had earlier. We've covered a lot of ground. We've emphasized the important role that offshore wind will play in raising climate ambition and achieving renewable energy targets. And that's, of course, very timely in advance of the climate summit that will be taking place tomorrow. I also want to thank John Sugan, Olga Kakova, Laura Macedo, our entire team, and maybe most of all, although I should thank everybody equally, but Maggie Jackson, our wonderful Deputy Director of the Energy Center, who's responsible for our climate policies, has sort of been putting together this whole ambition series. And you can rewatch today's event or share the stream with a colleague. You can find it on our Atlantic Council website and on the YouTube channel. So we're delighted that all of you could join us today. We have several more sessions later today, including at 1 o'clock that's 1 o'clock Washington time, on financing the path to net zero. So I want to thank you all for participating. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you again, Commissioner, and also Ambassador, and all of the other panelists. So thank you, and we're going to sign off.
Thank you.